Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. We promote positive method of training and behavior modification through stress-free methods. As part of that mission, we offer free webinars like the one you're about to watch. Subjects range from dog behavior, stress-free training, and other tools to help you understand your relationship with your dog. If you like the webinar, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Click the notification bell and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when future videos are posted. We would also appreciate it if you would make a tax-deductible donation to support our mission of providing stress-free dog education resources. You can find a donation button located at the top of our channel page and at the top of the Your Dog's Friend webpage. A link to our webpage along with the speaker's contact info are listed in the description for this video. Now enjoy the webinar.
Welcome to Your Dog's Friend webinar series. Today's webinar, as you know, is about a quick and easy way to train your dog without doing what you typically think of as training. Intrigued? Hang on, but first I want to introduce you to our speaker. Juliana DeWillems actually has too many trainer and behavior certifications for me to mention them all. She is also on the faculty of the Karen Pryor Academy, a top program for positive dog trainers. Juliana is the owner of JW Dog Training, which offers virtual coaching and in-person lessons in Northern Virginia, mainly for those of you around here in Arlington, Falls Church, Tysons, McLean, and Great Falls. She offers 4 webinars a year through Your Dog's Friend, and we are always delighted to have her back. She's one of our favorites, and she will be yours too. Please put your questions in chat. Juliana is probably going to save most, if not all of them, until the end, but put them as you think of them. And the other thing I need to mention, although I hate doing it, is donations. Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit, and we used to use excess from the training facility to help support the free programs like the webinars. However, we have a new landlord and our rent went way up. And so now we need to support the webinars mostly through donations. I'm going to put the link in chat periodically, but you can also find a donations icon on the homepage in the top right corner. Or if you go to the webinar schedule, next to every webinar, there is a little icon for donating. So please keep this in mind during or after the webinar. We really appreciate your help. I know that you will learn a lot from today's webinar, and I am turning it over to Juliana now.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, everyone who got here on time and who is joining us this afternoon. I am so grateful that you're here. Like Deborah said, I'm here 4 times a year giving webinars. I own JW Dog Training in the Northern Virginia, kind of outside the DC area. And just like Deborah said, we offer in-person lessons for that area, but we also offer virtual training worldwide at this point. So wherever you are in the country, we can help you and your dog virtually. We work with everything from puppies and basic manners to fear, anxiety, some more challenging issues like aggression, reactivity. We do it all. And this might be relevant to some of you. We actually just launched our cat behavior services as well. So I will have all my contact information at the end of the PowerPoint, and it will also be in the information box under the YouTube link. So you should have no problem getting in touch with me. A few housekeeping things Deborah mentioned a little bit, but please, I ask that you keep your personal cameras off, and please put your questions into the chat so that I can get to them. If they're relevant to the content right there, I'll go ahead and answer it. But like Deborah said, I'll probably answer a lot of them at the end. I also ask that you keep your questions more to the content and questions that everyone might have. More my dog questions that are specific to your own personal situation, unless I think it's going to be helpful for the group to hear. Those are better emailed to me later or worked through separately. I really want to make sure we get to everything today and that everyone, the questions kind of apply to everyone. So thank you so much again for being here and for your participation. All right, we will jump in just a second. Let me clear my screen a little bit. Okay. All right. So no training required. What exactly does that mean? I know it sounds too good to be true, and we'll see. Maybe at the end of this, you'll think it really is as good as it sounds. Well, that should. Okay. Okay. So what is this? What are these simple solutions that I'm talking about? I'm talking today about what is called management, and we'll get into what exactly management is, but the reason that management is so important and why I love it so much is because, as the saying goes, of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we can avoid behavior problems and avoid the environments that cause behavior problems, that actually solves a lot of our issues. And spending time doing management and prevention can save you so much work in the long run and so much work down the road if behavior issues were to get worse. So that's why I love management so much. It is just as the age-old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And you will see all about why that is in this presentation. So what exactly is management? Now, I will say there's not exactly one specific definition for it, but if you were to look it up, a definition that I continue to see was controlling the environment to decrease the likelihood a behavior occurs. But you'll notice that's not exactly what I have on the screen. I have changing the environment to decrease the likelihood a behavior occurs. Because for me, if you're seeing a problem behavior, then we do have to actively change the environment and change something about what's going on to decrease the chances that that behavior occurs in the future. Management does not require prior training, but some scenarios that we go over today will be helpful to practice ahead of time and to have a plan for. But management is truly just changing what we call in the science world, and I love the term from a science standpoint, but I hate it for pet parents because it probably makes, your eyes glaze over and you tune out. Antecedent arrangement. It is how we control the environment or circumstances to decrease the chances that a behavior occurs. Management does not address the underlying reason for the behavior. Management does not cure the behavior. It actually doesn't necessarily, it might not actually change the behavior at all. Because what you're doing with management is you're basically avoiding the problem. If there's an annoying behavior that you don't like, you simply make it so that that behavior does not occur. And you do that through changing the environment. You don't necessarily do that by teaching your dog a more appropriate behavior. Management is distraction. And I'll say in a second kind of why there are some split views on management, but it really is just you're distracting your dog. You're not teaching them how to cope with whatever their behavior is happening around. Management works differently for everyone, meaning what might work for one person in terms of management might not work for the next. And management is not a cure-all, but it can be extremely effective, meaning if you simply have a behavior that you don't like that your dog does, and you can manage it and that works for you, then great. You don't see the behavior anymore, and you actually didn't have to put too much training into it. Management can get a bad rap because exactly for all of these reasons, you're really not addressing the underlying issue. And you might hear from other trainers or other people with dogs like, oh, they're just avoiding the problem. And that's where personal preference really comes into play, because some people are completely fine with avoiding the problem. I am one of those people with my own personal dog. I work really hard on her reactivity, but at home, when she barks at noises, I just manage. I have not taught her to cope more with noises. I have not taught her to not bark at noises. I just changed the environment so that she basically doesn't hear noises to bark at. And that's all we're going to talk about today. So as we dive into this, if you're thinking to yourself, well, this feels kind of like a Band-Aid, it is. And I certainly don't want to lead you otherwise. I don't want you to think that I am naively thinking that this alone is solving behavior issues, but it might necessarily not be solving a behavior issue, but it might be solving the problem you're having with that issue, and it eliminates the behavior. So let's keep going. Management is an essential part of changing behavior. So as much as there's mixed reviews on management and everyone's different about how much they use it, when you're changing behavior, management is essential. I use management with every single behavior issue that I work on, whether it's a young puppy and we manage the environment so they don't get crazy nippy and nip at their humans a bunch, or if it's in a dog who's aggressive and biting people. We use a ton of management so that that dog is not put in a situation where they have to rehearse the biting or they get to the point where they're actively reacting. Because the thing about management is that we decrease the opportunities for doing the behavior. And then the times that the dog is presented with the conditions that typically brought out the behavior, that's when we train and we proactively train and get new behaviors. But you can't do that 24/7. We simply cannot be training 24/7. And that is such an important reality to understand. So when you're not training, you're managing. Because management prevents a behavior from occurring, it prevents that behavior from being reinforced. If your dog simply cannot do the unwanted behavior, that behavior won't get rewarded in any way. And why is that important? Because reinforcement drives behavior. Of all the concepts that, trainers talk about, this is one of the most important ones. Reinforcement is kind of a fancy word for rewarding. And so that's important because when you have a behavior and you add reinforcement, also known as a reward, that's kind of the common term. Now, remember, reinforcement is simply pay to your dog. Reinforcement can be treats, but reinforcement can also be attention. And this is where people get into a lot of trouble with unwanted behavior. The behavior is being reinforced inadvertently and accidentally by our own attention to the dog. And other things are play or initiating a fun behavior that they like, getting to go for a walk. There's so many different forms of reinforcement. And a lot of times with unwanted behavior, there's a lot of environmental reinforcement happening and rewards coming from the environment. And that's not necessarily something we can always control. And so even without us being involved, the dog is somehow being rewarded and reinforced for the behavior in some way. And when you add reinforcement to a behavior, you see an increase in that behavior. The dog runs to the front door barking. The guy comes and puts your package down, and the male person puts your package down, and then the male person leaves, and your dog thinks, great, I just got the male person to go away. That's reinforcing their behavior. We had nothing to do with it, but by running to the window, barking, the male person walks away, as they were going to do, regardless of what your dog did. The dog has been reinforced for that, and the behavior will increase in the future. So the reason that management is so important is that we eliminate the behavior altogether. We control the environment so that the behavior is not practiced, and therefore it is not reinforced, and therefore you will not see the behavior get stronger. This is outside of just the convenience of management. This is why it's so important in a behavior training plan. Every time that your dog gets reinforced for something, we are increasing the chances that they do that behavior in the future. So we have to prevent the rehearsal of the behavior. So let's take a look at this and bear with me while I explain it. So we just looked at that money in the previous slide as reinforcement, and that again can come in the form of praise, play, treats, attention. There's so many things that can reinforce behaviors. And your dog is going to choose from behaviors that have a reinforcement history, that have worked for them in the past. And so you see out of these 3 behaviors, the first 2 have really strong reinforcement histories. And these can be desirable behaviors or undesirable behaviors. Perhaps you've gotten really good at reinforcing your dog for sitting, and your dog has a heavy bank account for sitting, so they choose that. But then there's also, jumping up. That often is a behavior that gets heavily reinforced accidentally through attention. So that bank account is strong as well. It's simply the science. But when it comes to management, we prevent that bank account from getting heavy, and we decrease the chances that the dog will pick that behavior in the future. And so you can just see this visual. If you look at behaviors as having bank accounts, and we want to make sure we are not depositing into the unwanted behaviors bank account, that's where management is so important. The behavior issues that we will discuss today: barking at noises from inside the house that they hear outside, barking out windows, barking on walks, jumping on guests, behavior around guests once they're inside, counter surfing, and chewing. Now, these are just the ones that I go over today. Of course, there are going to be more that you might come up with. But my hope for today is that I get you thinking creatively about how you can manage your own dog's environment to prevent the rehearsal of whatever unwanted behavior you're trying to decrease or work on. So let's start with barking at noises. And this is just a fun example of what I'm sure those of you who have dogs at home who bark are used to hearing. So that's pretty common, right? With dogs who are noise, we label that noise sensitive. And she didn't see anything, but she heard something in the distance. And at that, that could have been somebody in the hallway. That could have been just, who knows? It feels like sometimes with these noise sensitive dogs, they're like hearing the invisible tigers walking around outside, and that you just want to say, there's nothing there. But noise sensitivity is particularly hard because they can probably hear a little bit more than we can, but more importantly, we can't necessarily control the noises that are happening outside. Okay, so how would you manage that? And this is a big one. This one, barking at noises and barking out the window, are big ones that we really managed here at my house. And we love these solutions because they have made our life so much quieter. So the first one is a simple noise machine by the source of the noise. And so this is a noise machine. It's off Amazon, and that's a lot of this stuff here is really simple. This is I guess you guys can't see my mouse, but that's the front door right there. So we strategically place a noise machine between the source of the noise and where our dog would be. And again, you can get really simple white noise machines on Amazon, Target, whatever. So it's very easy to find. A radio or a TV works the same way. I know a lot of clients who leave Alexa on, but I do find that noise machines, especially, I think we know that brown noise is really effective at blocking out noises. Those are usually a little bit more effective than just leaving the TV on. I think anecdotally, I've found that dogs can kind of hear through the TV. Restrict access to trigger areas. If there is, so maybe you live in an apartment where down at the end of the hallway is the front door, which is where people are walking outside. You can put a gate up at the end of that hallway and prevent your dog from being up close to the door. Same thing with maybe your dog reacts to trucks and people out front. If you can keep them in the back of the house, maybe that can help with decreasing their noise sensitivity. And hopefully you all are realizing by now, we're simply creating conditions where your dog actually doesn't hear as much. So distracting with a chew or a Kong, this is another great way to basically just distract your dog and have them not focus on everything that they're hearing outside. This is especially effective if there's a particularly noisy time of day, maybe in the mornings when all the kids are walking to the bus stop. That's really hard for your dog. Or if, again, you live in an apartment and after work, now that we're kind of going back to work and people are coming home at the end of the day, if there's a particularly challenging time of day, giving a long-lasting chew, a frozen Kong, licky mats are really, really helpful for this stuff right now. A licky mat is where you literally you smear something on it and you can stick it in the freezer. It's just a mat and your dog licks it. It can be really calming, really high value, and really distracting. And then, of course, the obvious one, just close the windows and the doors. So for those of you who have noise sensitive dogs and you try to enjoy a nice spring day with your doors open, I'm sure you know the struggle of, like, every time I try to have the window open, and then I'm like, okay, this is not worth it. My dog's barking too much. I'm going to close it. And I just think to myself, this is why we can't have nice things. It's like all I wanted to do was enjoy a nice spring day. But this is where management, again, like, I cannot stress enough. We are not talking about training here. We are avoiding the issue. If I wanted to sit with my dog and counter condition her to noises and teach her to not bark at noises, I could do that. I absolutely could do that. But I spend a lot of time training other people's dogs and I spend a lot of time training my dog on other issues. And so this is just not an issue that I have prioritized. And in that moment, I just choose to close the door. So it's very effective. Okay. This is my number one favorite solution for many reasons for dogs who bark out the window. And barking out the window can look like a lot of things. It can be somebody's delivering packages and your dog barks at them. It can be a dog who scans out the front window and waits for people to walk by the house. It can be a dog who is sensitive enough that seeing shadows and stuff outside is hard for them. And this one, barking at stuff outside the window, I feel like is one that is so closely related to their overall vigilance levels and their ability to relax inside and out on walks. So if you've ever taken a reactive dog course, you've heard that if your dog sits at home and barks at stuff outside the window, triggers out the window, then they will go out on walks way more elevated. They've got cortisol in their system. They've practiced the behavior. And it's really important to not let them rehearse that all day long. And so we always recommend just simply block their view out the window. Some people think, they're watching doggy TV. It's so entertaining for them. And if you're worried about enrichment, we can come up with other solutions because unfortunately, even if they're watching doggy TV for an hour, they still might be reacting for 15 minutes out of that. And that's a lot of reactivity to practice. So this is what window film looks like. So this is my dog here, and she used to be able to see the Chihuahua at the top. She used to be able to see out into the courtyard, and now she can't. And I think anecdotally, this has decreased barking in our house by like 90%. She really doesn't bark at anything anymore. And it is so lovely and quiet, and it's great. And there's another picture down there. So I'm going to take a question real quick about window film. Veronica asks, is blocking the view out the window something we should see as only temporary? I read that it should not be a permanent solution. What do you think? So this is a really great question, Veronica. Thank you for asking. This is where management is a fully personal decision, and it depends on your dog and your goals and maybe the trainer you're working with and what you come up with for your own personal situation. I can tell you, I will be managing this for the rest of my life because, again, barking out the window is not really an issue that I feel like is going to be on our training plan list anytime soon. And my personal advice and professional advice would be like, if it's working for you and you don't mind it and your dog is happy and you're happy, then I certainly don't see any reason to change it. But every individual situation is different, and that would be more of a personal preference. So thank you for asking. So somebody also mentioned their dog doesn't need to see a dog out the window. He knows when another dog goes by. So my guess is if a dog reacts without the visual, that is likely they're reacting to the noise. They can hear, the tags jingling. They can hear just the dog and in the distance, the footsteps of the human. And so that might be a noise issue. So pairing the window film with maybe a white noise machine or some classical music might help address that issue from a management perspective. So restricting access to the trigger areas with gates or doors. This is the exact same thing. If you have a front room where your dog often barks, simply restricting access to that room could be really beneficial. And closing the blinds. This is a big one. Now, unfortunately, for many of our reactive dogs, they will just put those blinds right up, or unfortunately, they will destroy the blinds. So it's kind of up to you if you want to take that risk, but closing the blinds can definitely be a solution. If that's, if that works for your house and you don't mind trialing and erroring there a little. And again, distracting with a chew or a Kong. If they are particularly revved up or it's a busy time of day outside, you want to keep them away from the window, that can be just distracting them, can be a really great option. There was one other question Rhea asked when it came to noticing that another dog is walking outside the house. And I said it could be, if it's not the sight, it could be the sound, and could it be smell? Yes, definitely. I think it could be the smell. And this is where, in my opinion, if there's a behavior that is happening and you can't manage it, where there's a factor in contributing to the behavior and you can't manage it, I would still try as much management as you can for the other things that it could be. Because if your dog is experiencing 3 different triggers or 4 different triggers every day, maybe it's the sound of people and the sight of dogs and the mail being delivered through the mail slot, and there's a bunch of different triggers each day. If you can eliminate as many of those as possible, then when they do experience that one trigger, when they can't hear the dog and they can't see the dog, but they can smell the dog, if they're only experiencing 1 out of more triggers, then their reaction might be less because they're not as trigger stacked. So they're not going so overboard because they're not experiencing the trigger at such a high volume. And if that doesn't work, my big answer for a lot of this stuff will be, I would definitely recommend working with a trainer to get to the bottom of it, but see what level of triggers you can eliminate. Great question. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit to barking on walks. So we've talked about barking inside the home and barking at noises, so visuals and noises. And one thing, this is not a behavior modification presentation, but for dogs who are reactive to stuff outside, I cannot stress enough the importance of letting their home environment be a quiet. So I'll go back to the last slide because it's not letting me. I can't stress enough how important it is for their home environment to be a quiet, calm place where they get a break from triggers. They get to turn off, they can relax, they don't have to be vigilant. So using management at home is really, really important because, again, it's not practical. You're going to be able to train 24/7, but your dog really deserves to get a break when they are at their home where they live. So even if you're doing a lot of training out on walks and with other stuff and triggers here and there, if you can make home a quiet, managed space, void of, excessive stimulation and triggers, your dog, you'll notice that they've got a lot more in their cup for when you do training in other scenarios. Okay, so switching gears to on walks. Now remember, this is avoidance. Management is this is avoiding seeing triggers on on walks. Sorry. Triggers could be anything that your dog barks at. Dogs, people, bikes, cars, anything that your dog has a reaction to. Management is going to avoid that. It is not going to teach your dog how to cope with seeing it. It is not going to solve the issue for you, but it will give you a break, which is so important, and it will prevent the rehearsal of the behavior. So, avoiding triggers on walks. Hiding is one of the best ways that you can do this. So physically putting a physical block between you and the trigger. This can look like hiding behind cars or between cars, like I'm doing in this picture here, behind trash cans, behind up driveways. So just avoiding and physically putting a barrier between you and the trigger can be really, really important. Walking in alleys or parking lots. So this management solution is not as much in the moment, but more so just generally where you choose to walk. So if you have a dog who can be reactive to triggers, just choosing to walk in locations where you're less likely to see triggers is technically a form of management because, well, unless you're doing training, and that, in which case that's not as, you're still managing because you're changing the environment and you're setting your dog up for success, which is great. But if you were to simply kind of just try to avoid triggers altogether, walking in creative spaces where you're less likely to see those triggers is a really, really great management tool. Another option, I just posted about this on Instagram about places you can go to avoid triggers. So this is like, you can take your dog on hikes, you can take your dog, schools actually are a really good option if your school lets you walk your dog there. Some cemeteries are actually dog friendly. So there are a lot of kind of unconventional places that you can walk your dog so that you avoid triggers. And then dropping high value treats on the ground for your dog to eat and search for and then eat. So this is basically what we call a treat scatter. And this is getting your dog distracted, because remember we said management is distraction. This is getting your dog distracted away from the trigger. Now, I will add that, thank you, Nicole. Nicole just put my, the JW Dog Training Instagram URL in the chat window. And I will say with all of this management, this is supposed to be before your dog starts barking and going over threshold. It can also be used once your dog has started barking if you need a space to calm them down and feed and get them back down to earth, their brain back down to earth, not in outer space where they usually end up when they're reacting. But this is really meant for, okay, you see a dog in the distance, you're going to choose to avoid that dog by doing some of these things. There will always be the question, well, what happens if, my dog's barking, my dog's not taking treats, my dog's not moving? I can't answer all of those questions. It all comes down to your individual dog. But please keep in mind that these goals, these management solutions are meant to be implemented before your dog notices the trigger so that you can ideally go on your walk without your dog even perceiving the trigger at all. So this is what a treat scatter looks like. So I'm going to be walking Lola, and she hasn't seen a trigger here. So she's easy to gently move off of the sidewalk. I might use a treat lure to get her over to show her the treat and move. And then I'll just go ahead and play it and then narrate it for you. So she follows me off. She's doing great. So I kneel down to keep her engaged, and I'm scattering treats in the grass. And you'll notice Lola's facing me. Her back is to the sidewalk, and I'm scanning the sidewalk. So I have intentionally positioned myself this way so that I can keep track of who is or what might be passing us. And Lola is focused on me and the food and just not noticing anything around her. see. Okay. So we covered avoiding by hiding, walking in unconventional places where you're unlikely to see triggers, dropping treats on the ground in a treat scatter, and then lure your dog past triggers using a high value treat. So a treat lure is exactly what it sounds like. You use a treat in your hand. I usually recommend a big chunk. You put it right on their nose and you use it like a magnet right in front of their nose to get them past the trigger. We see a lot what we call treat blackout, where your dog doesn't pay attention to anything but the food. It's kind of what we're going for here. And that's the reason why we put it right in front of their face, so that they don't even look around them. They've almost got blinders on and they just go and they follow the food that's right on their nose. So this is what that looks like. So here's my fake dog over there on the right, and I have the treat right on her nose, and you can see her kind of stay right magnetized to it. And she just focuses on the treat as we pass. She didn't even have a chance to look around or notice anything else. Nancy asked a great question in the chat. What are some examples of high value treats? And I will go into that right now, because having high value treats is really important for management. And so the highest value is, of course, going to be real meat, real cheese, what is commonly referred to as people food. But as a training colleague once said to me, your dog's food is not made from stuff from Mars. Your dog's food is made from the same stuff people's food is made from. It all is people food. So the stuff that is typically labeled as people food is usually the highest value, but your dog kind of chooses what's high value. So another great option, especially for management, is baby food. So meat flavored baby food, and sticking that right in their nose and having them eat right out of the pouch or out of the jar as you walk past a trigger can be really, really effective. Squeezed cheese, peanut butter, there's a lot of options. Yep, string cheese is great, hot dogs, a lot of great options in the chat. Elizabeth had a question. I've tried a variety of high value food and none of them work. So there's usually a reason why high value treats are not working for your dog, or your dog is not able to eat outside when you're trying to train. It could be that they're overstimulated, they're too nervous, they're very distracted. So that's unfortunately an example of where I would definitely recommend working with a certified trainer to get to the bottom of why a dog isn't eating outside. Okay, so I thank you again, Nicole. So Nicole put into the chat a post that we did just put on Instagram and about why is my dog not eating outside. It's really, we did go more in depth in it there. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. So speaking of Instagram, I pulled a few what are called reels off of our Instagram because I've made them about topics like that we're talking about today. Now, reels, unfortunately, we like them so much because they are quick. They're only 30 seconds, but that means that the information flies by. And unfortunately, they are not horizontal. They are vertical. So it's pretty small. So what I'm going to do for you today is when I play the reel, I will narrate what words are on the screen. So this is going to be more management techniques for dogs who bark on walks. Sometimes it's best to avoid a trigger with a reactive dog instead of doing training. Here are some ways to keep a dog's attention away from a trigger. Treat lure, letting them lick and chew on a tasty treat that's held at their nose. Continuous feeding, keep the dog facing you while you keep an eye on the trigger. Dog doesn't need to be in a sit. Treat scatter, lots of small treats on the ground in front of the dog to distract them. It's impossible to train 24/7. Sometimes avoidance is needed, and that is okay. So again, if you want to, I'm certainly not trying to sell you to push you to go to my Instagram, but there really is a lot of good information there. I cover a lot of these topics in more depth on our page. So Caitlin brought up a great question. I found that my dog is very wary of a treat lure. So we had to train it at home in the situations that were low stress. So he trusts me enough to follow it. We're not there yet, but it's coming. Caitlin, this is such an important point. So it actually is beneficial to train a dog to follow food in front of their face, also known as a lure. This is one of those situations where, while I said management does not necessarily require training, there are going to be management tools that you would benefit from practicing ahead of time so that your dog is familiar and goes, oh, I know this game. This is the treat magnet game. Okay, I understand what I should do here. Really good point, Caitlin. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit away from barking at stuff outside. And now we are going to talk about going back inside and managing when our dogs jump on guests, when guests first come in the door. So this is specifically when people are literally walking through the door, getting ready. Kind of getting to your home and getting settled. So the first option is to put your dog in a separate room or a crate and just take them completely out of the equation, because then they cannot practice the jumping and it prevents the rehearsal of the behavior and any reinforcement they may get. I will say that this option is really nice because finally you can just focus on your guests and not focus on your dog. The doorbell went off.
Good job.
So as you could see, the doorbell went off. I got the dogs to the backyard. I tossed some treats out there for them. And then I went and I got my guest. So this is just so much lower stress than both of those dogs being at the door, barking. They're very friendly dogs, but it's chaotic. It's a lot. And so a management solution would be to just simply put them away as people walk in the door. Then once everyone is settled, you can let the dogs out. That gives you a chance to, focus on your guests, say, hi, how are you? And they can put their stuff down. They can get comfortable. And that gives you a chance to give them kind of your spiel. If you are doing some training, hey, here's some treats, ask Fluffy to sit, or they're a little nervous. Can you ignore them? So there's a lot of reasons why having the dog out of the equation for the first part people come over is really, really beneficial. And this is another one of those where rehearsing ahead of time can be really helpful because your dogs know the drill. You grab some treats, maybe you have a cue. Let's go to your room or let's go to the yard, whatever cue you want to use. Having that be familiar to them will make it a lot easier. Another piece to this too, if you are going to keep your dog out of the equation or you need some time to get your dog situated when a guest arrives, is putting a sign on your door that says, thanks for coming over. Give me a minute. I'm getting my dog set up and I'll be with you as soon as I can. Takes the pressure off you as well. Okay. So we covered putting your dog in another room, putting your dog behind a baby gate. So this is also a really easy and effective solution where the dog is not necessarily put totally away, but they are behind a gate so they can't rush the front door. And the thing is, a lot of these times, whether you're putting them away in a room or they're behind a gate, they might be pretty crazy back there. Like, this is not saying you're going to have a dog who just calmly sits back there. They might be jumping on the gate. They might be barking, but at least they're not jumping on your guests, right? And that's where you decide how much training do you want to do? Because at that point, your guest comes in, again, you can tend to your guest. Hi, hello. Yes, I know the dogs are barking. I'm going to do some training. And it gives you a chance to just puts a buffer between your guests coming in the door and you then bringing the dogs into the equation. It gives you time to grab some treats. It gives you time to go over with your guests what the plan is going to be to help the crazy dog settle down. There's so many benefits to keeping your dog away from the front door. Another, again, like less removed option is having your dog on leash at the front door. So some people will do this so that you can keep your dog close to you. You've got them nice and close to you to offer treats for good behavior, for preventing jumping on your guests. And it just adds a level of control. And then also dropping treats on the ground and feeding treats low. So this means this is probably like the least removed option that your dog would be, where it's still management. And the reason that this is technically management is because you're still avoiding the issue. You're not letting them meet your guest and then giving them treats on the ground. You're trying to avoid them approaching your guest by giving them other stuff to do and feeding them low on the ground. So here's a video of that. Now, this is, I think I'm just coming in here, but it would look similar if you had guests coming in, where I am almost these treats on the ground are almost not contingent on behavior. I'm just going to start dropping them. I'm not asking for anything good. I'm dropping the treats first to get the behavior I'm looking for, which is 4 paws on the floor, looking down, orienting down, staying calm, staying quiet, and not jump up on me. So I walked in. I did not give the dog a chance to jump. I simply did a big treat scatter. The dog went and found the treats. And the thing about something like this is it involves sniffing, and sniffing can promote calmness and can get a dog to calm down if they're aroused or excited. So there's a lot of benefits to this. It gets the dog focused on something else. It gets their head down and knowing that good stuff comes from low, not from high. So there's a lot of benefits to this. Again, something that takes some proactive practice, knowing where your food's going to be, planning to have food that treats that compete with how exciting the guest is. But another thing about this, and with management in general, so I know I said that management is not training, meaning you're not training your dog to necessarily offer better behavior, but something like this actually can lead to better habits because your dog starts to anticipate the treats coming from a few feet away on the ground. And guess what? Dogs do what works for them. So if over time the dog starts to realize, well, you're just going to toss the treats over here anyway, I might as well kind of hang back and just wait for them and look at the ground and kind of hang out over here because I know that's where I'm going to end up to get the food anyway. So, you'd be surprised where management can actually surprisingly lead to better habits and better behavior. And then maybe you start moving more towards real life where not that you are so focused on moving away from the management, but you might start to notice you don't have to manage quite as much because your dog is just offering better behavior. Okay, so we focused, just to summarize, you can put your dog in another room or a crate. You can put your dog behind a baby gate, have your dog on a leash at the front door, or just drop treats and kind of toss treats and get them focused and distracted on something else. So once your guest comes in, and, a lot of us experience this. Your dog is crazy. They're jumping all over your guest. Your guest is trying to sit on the couch and your dog is just all over them. They're jumping. Maybe they're trying to play. So how do you manage this? Well, this one is so important and really helpful. Prepare ahead of time and have a chew or a long last, or like a frozen Kong or a licky mat or a food puzzle. Have something ready to just occupy your dog and distract your dog so that they're not focused on the guests. The nice thing about this, you're kind of feeding 2 birds with 1 seed. You're giving your dog something else to focus on so they're not mobbing your guests. And this helps to calm them and chill them out a little bit so that when they are done, they're much more likely to be pretty chill and acclimated to your guests. But again, this takes pre-planning, setting your dog up for success, stuffing the Kong, making sure you've got the bully sticks. This takes a little bit of planning ahead of time. And just like front door stuff, you can just choose to keep your dog in another room. And any time that I'm recommending management, that includes sequestering or putting in a crate, or if your dog is comfortable in the crate, putting them in another room. It is really important that you meet your dog's needs before that. So it would not be fair if you're going to have people over for dinner to, do your normal routine and then just put your dog back there. I would definitely recommend that you make sure that they get plenty of good exercise that day, maybe some extra enrichment, some extra training, so that they're happy to just snooze away in another room while you've got guests over. And another thing that can be helpful if you are sequestering while people are over is playing white noise, if in that room, or pretty much just playing white noise or radio or something, so that your dog doesn't hear everybody downstairs if that is an issue that if they have a hard time settling when they hear people at home. So Chaz is asking, what about managing when the dog focuses on growling or lunging at a particular person, if crating or sequestering is not an option? So I unfortunately it's not, that issue is a little bit too severe for me to kind of speak broadly on right now. I mean, human safety is number one. So making sure your dog is managed, or there's a baby gate or the dog is on the leash and they can't physically get to that person, but there's so many other factors. And so it's really, really important that you work with a certified trainer to come up with a plan for when you do have guests over, to keep your guests safe and to keep your dog comfortable and ideally under threshold. So great question. Thank you for asking. Veronica says, I thought my dog was crazy for not being able to settle while I was with a friend in the other room. Thank you for validating that this is normal. This is very normal. And it happens a lot more with young dogs. So like teenagers, or that's going to be up to like 2 years old, 2 to 3 if it's a large dog. So that's really common, that the person is just too novel and they get really excited and they can't settle. But it can happen with older dogs too. So just having a plan and setting your dog up for success, making sure your guest is on board and having lots of options for them to help them settle. Yes, Veronica said, my dog just turned 1. Yeah, prime time to be not the best house or guest with your human guests. Okay, so now we're going to talk about counter surfing. All right. So to define counter surfing real quick, counter surfing is when your dog puts their paws up on the counter and grabs stuff off the counter and either eats it or runs away with it. Now, this is a really interesting issue because you either have it's either like really challenging for you and you're dealing with a lot of counter surfing, or your dog doesn't counter surf and this doesn't apply to you. So I've found it interesting that some dogs will be relentless in it, and some dogs they've never even thought of putting their paws up on the counter. So what's really important with counter surfing is keeping your counters empty so that if they do jump up, they don't get anything, because reinforcement drives behavior. So if your dog jumps on the counter and grabs your sandwich that you were making for lunch, guess what they are going to try really hard to do again. So the human end of this, you have to keep counters empty, cabinets closed, all the good stuff off of the counter. This is so important. And so like Lois mentioned, my 6-month-old golden doodles, I say, come out of the womb on their hind legs. I mean, they're ready to jump on people, jump on counters. It's so normal for them. It's very, very ingrained behavior. Is a real surfer for food, for mats, for gloves. And so I think some of the stuff that we talk about today will be helpful, because if we can't guarantee that they can't get a win, then they will always keep counter surfing, because why wouldn't they? Dogs do what works for them. It's don't kill the messenger. It's just kind of the science behind it. So keeping your counters empty is first line of defense. Restricting access to the kitchen. So for a lot of dogs, especially if they're younger, if you have a way to just keep them out of the kitchen during especially high traffic times, high activity times, then if you can, maybe you're cooking dinner and your kids are doing their homework and everything is chaotic, if you can just kick them out of the kitchen for an hour, that might be beneficial and helpful so that they physically can't get to the counters. Another option is tethering. So if kicking them out of the kitchen because they're too young and they're going to go cause trouble in other parts of the house is not an option, you can keep them in the kitchen with you, but we have to prevent them from accessing the counters, because this is where management is important to changing behavior. Remember, you cannot train 24/7. There will be times when your back is turned. There will be times when you as a human, management will fail. You'll leave the dish towel out, you'll leave your sandwich out, and your dog will get a win. And so if we can physically prevent them from doing that, that's one of the most important things. And for some of you, you might be also implementing strategies for training an alternative behavior and teaching your dog to ignore food on the counter. But in between that proactive training, we have to be preventing your dog from approaching the counter. So a tether is a great option for that. And I have a video on tethering, so I will go ahead and show that to you, what it looks like kind of in practice. Now, this was a really brief moment of tethering, and we were doing it during a lesson. And so the dog is tethered to her collar. I definitely recommend tethering to harnesses, although I also recommend that dogs are never, ever tethered unsupervised. So even if your dog was on a collar, which is the risk of that is like they can, choke themselves basically, there should never be a point where they would be unsupervised and you wouldn't be able to see what's happening. So I'll go ahead and narrate this one again. A tether can be a great way to secure a young dog for short periods of time while supervised. It can keep a young dog out of trouble, but allows them to still hang out with you. Tethers can prevent the rehearsal of nipping, jumping, and counter surfing. Giving a long-lasting chew or a frozen Kong can help a dog settle while they're tethered. Tethering isn't a good option for all dogs. We don't recommend it if it increases frustration and anxiety, but for some dogs, it can really help. So this is Sweet Zoe. She is, I'll just play this again while I'm talking. So this is the family's kitchen. The tether is hooked up to the back door. She's got a super cozy bed. She's within reach, so her humans can walk past and drop a piece of kibble or a small treat for her when she's lying calmly. But you can see she's at the end of her tether now, and she cannot physically get to the counters. This is so important. And so this has really helped to decrease Zoe's counter surfing because she simply hasn't been able to practice the behavior. And also, what's the nice thing about management is that a lot of times you then are getting a different behavior that you like instead. And so we've gotten a lot of opportunities to reward Zoe for being in her bed. And that behavior has now gotten a really nice, strong bank account. And this is, Zoe's young, just like Lois, your golden doodle, this young time in this adolescent phase is full of management, and it's not going to be like this forever, but this is a tough age. Management is best and most used for, any dog, don't get me wrong, but definitely that teenager from like 6 months to 2 years. Okay. So I think this is the last one. So management for chewing is, okay. So there was a comment in the chat real fast about tethering that she'd be stressed if she was tethered. So that's a really good point. And management can also be tricky. You might see this too, like with gating or like putting your dog behind a baby gate or in a room, where if you just were to just do it and not practice it or get your dog used to it, then that can actually increase stress and anxiety, which obviously is not what we want. So with tethering, you'd be surprised. Some dogs can acclimate to it, especially if you do in short bursts and you stay really close to your dog and you give them a nice long lasting chew and you give lots of reinforcement for being calmly tethered. Some dogs can never get used to it. So again, if you see any increased agitation or frustration or stress, then obviously that's not what we want. But it's worth a shot to see what you can accomplish with a little bit of practice, a little bit of proactive training. Okay. So with chewing, I would say like chewing up your stuff, chewing up your furniture, chewing up your remotes for your TV, your glasses. What do we do about chewing? So obviously close doors to rooms and closets that you don't want your dog to have access to, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. This is really common with young dogs where they, like the kids' rooms upstairs are just full of fun stuff to chew on. So everybody's doors just stay closed. This is really important. Pick up items you don't want chewed. Seems like kind of a no-brainer, but people have to be reminded that if you don't want your dog to chew it, pick it up, especially again for the first 2 years. So making sure that you avoid leaving stuff out, that you've got your favorite pair of shoes, do not leave them within the dog's reach. Restrict access to chewing areas. So furniture, wires, corners of carpets. I just had a client who their dog was chewing on the corners of the carpet. And so they simply made kind of like a blockade. They covered the area and they restricted the dog's access to that specific piece. And I'm in this presentation, you've noticed I haven't talked a ton about training, but I have to mention it with chewing, that a huge reason for chewing is your dog's chewing needs have not been met. And so if your dog is chewing up stuff in your house, there's a good chance that they have a deficiency in outlets for appropriate chewing. So make sure that you give them appropriate outlets for chewing. And this, I guess, does still kind of fall under management, because if you're giving appropriate chews, you're not necessarily teaching your dog to not chew shoes, but you're creating an environment where they don't feel like they need to choose shoes because they have plenty of other outlets. So this is so, so, so important. So somebody asks, what if they chew the doors? Okay, so this is it's not very common for a dog to just start chewing the doors. My guess is maybe this is happening when you're away, in which case, unfortunately, that would be an indicator of pretty severe separation anxiety. And it would be really, really, really important to work with a certified separation anxiety trainer, a CSAT. So really important to work with a professional on that one. Somebody else mentioned only paper items like toilet paper or paper type items. So the nice thing about that is it's totally fine to, while supervising, for most dogs, again, I'm speaking in general terms because I don't know anybody's specific dog. It is totally fine to give your dog paper items to chew up as long as they're not swallowing them, which a lot of people panic that their dog is swallowing stuff. But if you sit there and watch them, they're actually just shredding and spitting out. So if your dog is a big paper shredder, then give them Amazon boxes to rip up, give them paper towel rolls to rip up. And then if it's happening a lot and they're just going and stealing stuff, just close the door to the bathroom, right? It's so important. Okay. So great. Okay. All right. So didn't see your problem behavior in this webinar. Let's brainstorm. When does the behavior occur? And what can change the environment? What can you change in the environment to decrease the chances that this behavior occurs? So what can you remove? What can you add? What can you alter to change the likelihood that your dog doesn't practice this behavior? So, we had a question earlier, and Deborah, I think you reset it where for like example, the behavior of jumping on you and nipping at you when you walk through the house. Now, my first thought there is physical separation, because that's your dog cannot physically be behind a gate and jumping and chasing you. But more importantly, there seems like there's probably some other stuff going on. And so again, I would work with a certified trainer because there's probably some other stuff you can do in addition to management. But so like an example of that, or an example of management for like, if your dog is, your puppy's nipping you in the moment, like how do you manage that? Well, simply putting a barrier between you and your dog. So you step out of the X pen, or you go into a bathroom and you close the door for 30 seconds. And this is simply to interrupt the behavior and give everybody a break and save your skin, and then revisit when you have had a second to regroup, but not as much. And again, that's kind of a behavior. So like behavior that you're seeing frequently and is occurring regularly and in times during stuff that you have to do every day, like maybe that's not the best behavior to just manage. Maybe that is something that you really do have to work with a certified trainer to proactively train about. Okay. I'm just going to, right. Nope. You all get to hear Lola. Okay. So remember, takeaways. Management is intended to decrease the occurrence of the behavior. It can be a lot easier than training. It doesn't solve the issue, but it can make your life easier without a whole lot of effort. And it is dependent on your specific dog, your environment, and your specific behavior challenge. So it can be a super awesome tool. I think it's really important. How much you use it is up to you. And it's different. It can be different for everyone. So let's start with some questions. This is my contact information. Please share your questions in the chat. I think that I got to most everybody's questions, but please feel free to chime in. I'm here. I got nowhere to go. That was a pretty quick one for what I'm used to, a quick hour, although hour is even longer than I thought it would be. So I'll just be here ready to. Okay. So Deb asked management options for jumping up while we eat dinner. Okay. So let's think about that, right? So if you don't want your dog to have access to the table while you eat dinner, what are some management options, especially based on what we just talked about? So tethering is a really, really great one for this. If your dog can tolerate being in a tether. And Andy just asked what was used as the tether. It was literally just a leash looped over a door. But you can, usually people will have like a specific tether leash, especially if you want it to live there. Other things for jumping up during dinner could be putting, especially if it's a young dog, that's a great time to crate them with something to chew on, something to do. And also using a gate to separate them and keep them away from you. So jumping on you during dinner would be something where you have to figure out physical separation to prevent the rehearsal of the behavior. And I usually recommend management for something like this, again, especially for young dogs, because what's so important to note, everyone, is that the thing, a lot of this stuff can be age related. So if you can just prevent it for 2 years, and then you start to reintroduce the scenarios where it's challenging, then suddenly your dog has not been practicing the behavior for 2 years. And so they aren't going to choose that. And because they're more mature and they're calmer, they're like, oh, you're eating, cool. I'll just go lay down over here, because that's what I'll choose at this age, versus if they've continued practicing it for the last couple of years. Another example where simply preventing the behavior really improved it when we did start to reintroduce the scenario is a client of mine has a deck, and it is right next to, it overlooked a sidewalk, and her dog, a terrier, so very normal terrier behavior, was running the deck to bark at people outside. So she literally put up plywood for a few months, and then forget what happened, but for some reason the plywood came down at some point, and the dog didn't start barking again, because he just was used to, at that point, being on the deck and ignoring people, or not thinking about people, because he hadn't been practicing the behavior. And so it didn't even occur to him to kind of go over to the side and bark, because he was like, oh, the deck is where I just hang out with mom, and she drinks her coffee and I sit by her feet. because barking at people wasn't an option. And then even later, when it did become an option, he didn't go back to it because he had a nice behavior bank account for other more desirable behaviors. Okay. All right. I'm going to take off my contact info and you guys can look at just me. I recommend putting on speaker view. So you can see me talking. All right. I'm going to keep going through these questions. These are great questions. Thank you, everyone. So Lisa said, it seems like management is a really useful tool to use until training can occur, especially since many trainers have a wait list. Yes, absolutely. Management prevents the behavior from getting worse. And that can be so, so, so important. And then even then, once you start working with a trainer, you might manage 80% of the time so that 20% of the time you can do the training. Because remember, we cannot train 100% of the time 24/7. It's exhausting. It's impractical. Really, really great thought, Lisa. Thank you. Okay, so there were some questions for management about noise sensitivity in the backyard. We live an amount of time she's out there and she's never out there alone, but any other ideas? So this would be something where distraction might be beneficial. So if your dog is really noise sensitive or worried about people on the other side of the gate, engaging them in a game or engaging them in training or engaging them in treat scatters, food puzzles, chews, that might help in the backyard so that they simply aren't looking around or thinking about other sounds. Once that activity is over, they might go back to it, but you can prevent them barking by just trying to keep them occupied and interested in something else. Great question. Cindy had a question about socialization in the chat. Nicole and Deborah, I don't know if you can put something in there about maybe the AVSAB socialization handout, not to put you to work, sorry. Okay. Oh. Okay, I'm just reading through. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Yep, Jennifer mentioned in the backyard doing food scatters. Oh. Somebody asked about barking at squirrels outside. Management, keep your dog on leash outside, keep them. So I would say, okay, a management approach would be keeping your dog leash on leash outside, or not letting them out in the backyard unless you're okay with them chasing squirrels, or giving them other activities to do. This is toughie because Nicole, thank you for throwing the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior's position statement on socialization versus vaccinations. Thank you for doing that. All right. Somebody said, my dog likes to destroy things to get my attention, like while I'm eating or watching TV. Should I stop immediately, ignore her? So I would, not as much management, but my recommendation, anytime you're seeing kind of an unwanted behavior for attention, I would say like, what need is not being met that your dog is getting to the point where they're having to get so fussy to get something from you? Can we give them more enrichment before that? Can we make sure they're playing? Are they getting enough rest? That's really important. And so why do they have to resort to getting so fussy and destroying things? Like what else can we do during their day so that they feel really satisfied and they've gotten everything that they need? Great question. Okay. Oh, okay. So Sonia had a great question about bully sticks. And this is again relevant because management a lot of times involves chews. So the question was, my dog loves bully sticks, but I hear horror stories about not letting them eat the nub, so I take it away. Do you have any thoughts on bully sticks for chews? Always ask your vet when it comes to chews or foods that you're giving your dog, because I don't want to necessarily say, yeah, it's totally fine, and your vet doesn't clear it. But I have had really good experiences with bully sticks. And the nice thing is that they have a bully stick holder now so that you don't have to worry as much about the end. And this has been pretty life-changing. So it's a nice big blue plastic thing, and you screw the bully stick in so they can't physically get it small enough to swallow. And that, I feel like, has been a big relief for pet parents. Okay. Elizabeth asked about trainers. So reminder, Your Dog's Friend has a really wonderful trainers list for the DMV. So yourdogsfriend.org. They have recommended trainers, and you can always email me or direct message me on Instagram. And I always try to find people, trainers that are local to you. We are happy to work with things virtually, and we think virtual training is really, really effective. But we also know some people will just always prefer in person, but I really want to make sure no matter who you work with, they're good. So feel free to email or DM me for trainer recommendations. Okay. Ellen asked about extremely friendly. Okay. Ellen asked about a friendly doodle, and that trying to get your doodle to ignore people. We have a webinar on that called The Dark Side of Being Social, that I did for Your Dog's Friend. It is on their YouTube channel. I don't know the name of the bully stick holder, but I think if you look on Amazon or Chewy bully stick holder, it should come up. Teresa just asked, what if your dog barks when you get near a door or window? A management perspective would be, don't go near doors or windows. Okay. I think I've gotten to all the questions. I think we're kind of spilling into questions that are not quite about management. And again, I like to be really careful about giving too much advice for cases that are not my own and I don't know your individual dog. Remember, behavior change is so deeply individual, and there are a lot of different factors. So I really can't give too much advice if I don't know your specific situation. So I think I'm going to, Elizabeth, thank you. You put the bully stick holder in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up now. Remember, Juliana at jwdogtraining.com or jwdogtraining on Instagram. Come find us. I will do whatever I can to answer your questions or send you in the direction of a good certified trainer. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate you being here. I will see you in the
October
fall for my next webinar.
Thank you, Juliana. She will be back in October, this time talking about adolescent dogs.
Yeah, teenagers. So a lot of you who are watching today, you will probably get a lot. If your dog is under 2 years old, you'll probably enjoy the next webinar. So,
okay. Thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Juliana.
You're welcome.
For another great webinar.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.